Right. Good evening and welcome, Simon, to our discussion about Catalonia. Catalonia is not Spain, a historical perspective, and we're going to be looking at the book and the reasons behind the book and the reasons for the book, and learn more about Catalonia. And I've got to admit this: you've made a sale already, because I bought the book over the weekend, and I've been enjoying reading it and learning about something which, I mean, hearing in Great Britain, we take it as read that Great Britain has been around for 2,000 years, and it's not so of every country, as we'll discover of Spain and Catalonia in a minute. Right, just for everybody who's new to Blab, quick 2-minute look round. Top left-hand corner, you've got the title of today's session. Underneath that, you will see all the questions that come in. On the right-hand side of the screen, you will see who has joined us and has logged in on Twitter. And you can tap a message just by putting text in the bottom right-hand side. If you've got a question, /Q followed by your question, and we can then answer that question. One final thing, if what we're saying makes sense, then you can click on our pictures and give us props, and that will help us. Thank you, Skip. It doesn't. It's only here for the duration of the live Blab. It doesn't appear on the recording, fortunately, but it is a way of helping us to keep on topic, as it were. And the other thing is, at the end of this, we will have a video which we can put on YouTube, an MP3 file which can become a podcast. Right. Fantastic. Okay. So that's the setup, and best place to start is. We're talking about Catalonia Is Not Spain, historical perspective by Simon Harris. And we've got Simon with us tonight. And the best place to start is, where did the idea to write the book come from?
Well, I've lived in Barcelona since 1988. And there's a series of doors when it might seem a bit strange to many people, because I'm obviously British. I'm from Nottingham originally. But Catalonia, the Catalans are a nation, a very accommodating nation. And I actually feel Catalan now after all this time. I'm on my second wife now. I've got children. I feel very much part of the society. And I think there's a series of doors that you go through when you integrate here. And it might seem a little bit absurd, but the first one for me was supporting Football Club Barcelona, the greatest club in the world. The second thing is learning to speak the language, because it's well, it's not a minority language, but it's a stateless language. So they're extremely grateful to you for learning the language. And then I got interested in their history. And because they don't have a state, it's kind of interesting. If you don't have a state, nobody believes everybody calls it Spanish history.
Indeed,
where it's not, whereas it's not. And my first wife's aunt was passionate about history, and when I first got here, she took me out and would wave her walking stick militantly in the air as we looked at monuments and tell me about the history. So I began researching, like back in the early 90s, and checking out what seemed to me to be very fabulous claims. And finally, once the independence movement kicked off, it got me thinking, really what this country needs is somebody to tell their history in a very digestible form to the rest of the world. So I took that upon myself, and that's how the book came about. And really, I want to be a bit more, explain the title. Obviously, Catalonia is Spain at this point in time. The idea of the title is because you see this on banners all over the place. It's Catalonia Is Not Spain, a historical perspective, and it's much more of a discussion rather than an affirmation, really.
No. So Catalonia, as we can see from the map, which has replaced my photo for a moment, is bordered by France and Spain. Yeah. So its history has been influenced by both countries.
Yeah, I mean, in Catalan we call it a terra de pas, which is a land passageway, and basically it's had the unfortunate history of being locked between two mega and often violent nations. and has got it many times. And it's also strategically very important in that very prosperous top corner of the Mediterranean. So it's got a very rich and interesting history.
Right. And who were the first people to visit Catalonia and start trading?
Oh, it goes back. Well, the Iberians were in fact, the Iberian Peninsula, the local tribes, back around about 1000 BC. We think they probably came up from Africa, and the word Iberian is related to Berber. Okay. And when the Greeks came to Emporius. It's now called Emporius on the northern Costa Brava, and founded Emporion, which means market. Yep. And they named the local tribes the Iberians after the river, which is now called the Ebro. So the river and the tribe. This is about 600 BC. And then the whole peninsula took on the name. So the Iberian Peninsula is actually relates to the Iberian tribes who lived in ancient Catalonia when the Greeks arrived.
Okay, right. So that's the beginning of Catalonia. Is it Catalonia is the correct pronunciation?
Yeah,
If right, okay, good. Now, what basically the development of you say it's not a state.
No.
How would you describe it?
Well, okay, technically, it's in Spain. It's called an autonomous community, okay. And what we have is a kind of pseudo-federal system. Actually, it's really rubbish. I would not pseudo-federal. I would call it a rubbish federal system, okay. Because the problem with the system is that the autonomous communities have all the responsibility for education, health, and welfare, all services, but they're not allowed to collect their own taxes. And the current problem that Catalonia has with Spain, to a great extent, there's an identity element, and that's what I cover in the book. Yeah. But a lot of it is down to actually not being able to fund ourselves, and from being the per capita, Catalans are the third highest taxpayers in Spain. Yep. But when they receive investment back, they go down to 10th out of 17. So we end up paying much more than average, but being poor on average. We have a tax deficit here, which is 8% of our GDP, which is 16 billion euros every year. We pay more to central government. And I mean, the health and education services are going under. And so people are right to say a lot of this has been sparked off by the economic crisis. But we have very reasonable economic complaints. But there's also the historical, the language, the culture that marks us out as being different anyway.
Yep. So the Catalan language is. Can we go into the fact that the Catalan language has been used and not used so many times over the years? It's been banned, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's basically one of the things about totalitarianism, and I would say that Spain has a long history of centralized totalitarianism, is you make speaking a people's language illegal, and this is I mean it's not really genocide, but it's culturicide, if you know, linguisticide. I don't know how to say it. There have been strong attempts to make Catalan cease to exist. Catalonia was first annexed by the Spanish crown in 1714. And that was the first time when Catalan was made. It was difficult to make things illegal, but all administrative systems, the law, everything suddenly became done in Spanish. Now, if you think back to 1714, people weren't bilingual back then. It must have been an incredible shock to the society. The other thing that the Spanish crown did was close down all the universities. So another practice of the centralized Spanish government has been to close down the language, close down the education systems, and make life as difficult for the Catalans as possible.
But despite that, he has survived and he's thriving. Yes. I mean, he started off as a commercial trading centre, but it's a manufacturing centre as well now, isn't it?
Yeah, well, it's one of the two parts of Spain that went through. I mean, most of Spain actually hasn't gone through the Industrial Revolution yet. The two, what's kind of odd about Spain is the two other nations, the Basques and the Catalans, are the two most industrialized areas.
Right.
So in the 17th century, in fact, in the 19th century, Barcelona was known as the Manchester of the Mediterranean, because it competed with Lancashire as the European textile centre, and so that Catalonia's prosperity is really based on textiles. And now, obviously, it's in modern times, it's much more service-based, but we have a very good pharmaceutical industry, petrochemicals, a very strong manufacturing base.
So you've got an area which to all intents and purposes, is self-sufficient. And if it wasn't part of Spain, would it fare better if it wasn't part of Spain?
Well, I'm a pro-independence activist. I think we'd fare a lot better. Basically, simply because we'd have 16 billion euros more a year. It's been calculated that in order to set up the infrastructures of government, it would cost around 5 billion a year. So that leaves 10 billion going to build roads, schools, hospitals. There's also the problem with Spain, because it's centralized. We feel it has a deliberately even to this day, it has a deliberately anti-Catalan policy. Or I don't want to sound jingoistic here, but it doesn't bear Catalonia's benefits in mind. For example, you might have heard of the high-speed railway system in Spain called the AVE.
Yes.
We have a high-speed railway. After China, Spain is the country with more high-speed railways than any country in the world.
Wow.
In terms of kilometers, you might have noticed that China is quite a lot bigger than Spain.
Yes.
And but Spain has the AVE system all goes out. All the lines go out radially from Madrid. And if the truth be known, there's only 4 lines that make sense, and that would be Madrid-Barcelona, Madrid-Valencia, Madrid-Bilbao, and Madrid-Seville, plus connecting lines between Barcelona and Bilbao and Barcelona and Valencia. You'd have listeners probably aren't familiar with the geography, but you kind of have a kite shape across Spain. But the system we've got, there's no connection between Barcelona and Bilbao, no connection between Barcelona and Valencia, and there's a radial system that fans out going to Santiago de Compostela and Albacete, which have 2 passengers per day, and each passenger costs about 15,000 euros in lost investments. Whilst at the same time, Spain has one of the worst freight rail systems in Europe. And one of the things both the European Union and the Catalans have been lobbying for decades now is something called the Mediterranean Corridor, which goes along the Mediterranean coast from France to Barcelona, the port of Barcelona, the port of Valencia, Cartagena, Malaga to Algeciras. This would be a fantastic way of getting all Spain's produce up into the north of Europe. And in fact, produce from the Middle East and Asia could come through the Suez Canal and directly dock into Barcelona and then go north into Europe, rather than having to come through the Straits of Gibraltar and up to Rotterdam. Now, this would be great for Spain. No, Madrid says, no. The Mediterranean corridor has to go through Madrid. And it's just lunacy. So it's Madrid cutting off its nose to spite its face, really, because this would obviously boost the Catalan economy. This is the way we feel anyway, and consequently there are lots of grudges.
Yeah. You've mentioned Madrid several times. How did that become the capital of Spain, as opposed to?
Okay. Up until Philip II, the reign of Philip II, Spain, the Castilian. It wasn't Spain really yet. It was called It was the Crown of Castile, and up until quite recently, Spain was always called the Spains because there was the Crown of Castile and the Crown of Aragon, and also the Basque Country, and these were separate Spains, and it was called the Españas. So the Crown of Castile, the main court of the Spains, was in the Crown of Castile, and this was a moving capital. And in 1561, Philip II decided to put it slap bang in the middle of the Iberian Peninsula, because Portugal was also part of the Spains then, and he decided to make the capital in the middle. Partly because it was in the middle of the massive desert called the Meseta, so it was very, very poorly connected. But mainly because it had great hunting. Right. And as far as we're concerned, the whole problem of Spain was that decision, because it was badly connected, and for that reason, this radial transport system, they were called the Caminos Reales in the time of Philip II, and all roads were built radial out of Madrid. Then when the railway came, radial out of Madrid. Now with the high-speed train, radial out of Madrid. Madrid is not a natural center, so it has to be, if you've ever driven around the center of Spain, I'm not knocking Spain, it's a brilliant country actually. Yeah. I love it, and it's great traveling around. But you take a car from Madrid. I've often driven between Barcelona and Madrid. But
it's about what, 400 miles?
Yeah, probably. Yeah, probably a little bit more than that. Right. More like 500, I reckon.
Okay. Yeah.
But you travel on roads, and you can go for an hour and a half without seeing anybody ever, and it's kind of lost right in the middle until you get up to Calatayud and up into Aragon. It's a completely empty wasteland. And it's a mad place. Most capital cities are on rivers or on coasts, or they're there for some kind of geographical reason. Madrid was placed there for political reasons, not for any. Doesn't make very much sense really.
But in terms of foreign involvement in Catalonia, which countries have been involved in the past?
Okay, lots. Well, we go right back to let's run through quite quickly the history. First, it was the Greeks, 600 BC. Then it was the Romans, 270 BC, and for a while Tarragona, during the reign of Augustus. Tarragona was actually the capital of the whole Roman Empire for about 10 years when Augustus made Tarragona his residence. And it was during the reign of Augustus that Barcelona was properly founded, that it became a proper colony, and that's about 14, I can't remember, it's 14 BC or 14 AD, but it's round about the time of Christ that Barcelona goes back. Then the Visigoths came as the Roman Empire was falling apart, and Barcelona was the capital of Visigoth Empire before that was split into two and had a capital in Toledo and Toulouse. Then the Moors, the Saracens came, the Arabs came up from Morocco, and one of the differences between Catalonia and most of the rest of Spain, that the rest of Spain was only finally conquered back from the Moors in 1492, whereas they were ousted. They only stayed in Catalonia for about 80 years. So the Arab influence on architecture and culture is much less. And what happened then is the Moors got up as far as Poitiers, and the Frankish Empire under Charlemagne's father, Louis the Pious, forced them back, and developed what they called a kind of buffer zone between the Frankish kingdom, which was later to become France, and Iberia, which was under Moorish control. And they called this the Marca Hispanica, the Spanish March. And Catalonia was originally just a buffer zone. Finally, the Counts of Barcelona became the strongest nobles in this buffer zone, and in 874 they became hereditary monarchs under the first Catalan king, who was the wonderfully named Wilfred the Hairy. Yes, Geoffrey Pilos, Wilfred the Hairy. We like this. But they were officially still vassals to the Franks until 987, when they declared independence. Then in the middle of the 12th century, 1157, I think, I can't remember the date now. It's over a year since I wrote the book. The Counts of Barcelona became kings of Aragon, and effectively under James I, who became king of Aragon in 1210. Barcelona effectively became the capital. Zaragoza and Barcelona were officially the two capitals of the realm. But Barcelona was a maritime city. So from Barcelona, they managed to conquer the Balearic Islands in 1232 and Valencia in 1238, and then started spreading out into the Mediterranean. And this is the amazing thing that people don't know, is that the Catalan Aragonese Empire included Catalonia, Aragon, Valencia, the Balearic Islands, but also Sicily, Sardinia, Corsica, the whole of the south of Italy, which was known as the Kingdom of Naples, the Duchy of Milan, the whole of the south of Greece, which were the duchies of Athens and Neopatria. So for about 200 years, it was actually the biggest empire in the Mediterranean. And we've mentioned Spain and France, but Catalonia has also had massive influence from Italy. So, for example, the Borgia popes, in English it's written Borgia because it's been Italianized, but actually they were Catalans and their name was originally Borgia. And there's all this fascinating stuff that people simply don't know, because Catalonia has been written out of history, because partly because it was in Spain's interest to do so, but it's one of the reasons why you need your own state. Otherwise, nobody mentions you in history books, apart from me.
Well, that's what makes the book fascinating, because we do take it that the countries have existed since, for the last 2,000 years, but that's not true, especially in the case of Spain. As you say, while Catalonia was out building an empire, Spain was still ruled by the Moors.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, it's a long process. The domination of Castile, of the Iberian Peninsula, is based on conquest. They've always been a fighting nation because they were fighting the Moors. And okay, it's wrong to say Spain was dominated by the Moors. By 1492, it was only the Caliphate of Granada. But the whole of what we now know as Spain, it took 700 years to get back. But there were, the Kingdom of Castile was important and large at the same time as the Crown of Aragon was building its empire. But it had nowhere to go. It had nowhere to go until Columbus set sail for the Americas. Right. Okay. And he set sail from where? Okay, there's in fact in the book, one of the chapters was Columbus Catalan. Conventional stories say that he was Genovese. He was a woolmaker's son from Genoa, but that doesn't make sense, because he ended up meeting the King of Portugal and then the Catholic kings in Spain. How does a pauper get to meet get to the courts of the most powerful kings and queens in Europe, and is given the money to take an expedition to the Americas, which is a bit like going, in those days, it was a bit like going to the moon. It was a major expedition. And he was sent there and his condition for going was that he would be hereditary viceroy of all the lands he conquered. Now, the only viceroys up until that point were members of the Aragonese, Catalan or Aragonese nobility. The idea of a viceroy, because Catalonia and Aragon had all these different possessions all over the Mediterranean, these were ruled by viceroys in most cases. So viceroy was a Catalan Aragonese office. Okay, this suggests that he definitely wasn't Genoese. There are theories that he was either Jewish or Greek. I say in the book that he was very, very probably Catalan, basically because that's my argument, although I do leave it in the book open to the reader's decision.
Indeed you do.
Yeah, and lay out all the evidence. But he was supposedly sailed from Palos de la Frontera in Andalusia. But apparently in those days, the port of Palos de la Frontera didn't have sufficient capacity to hold 3 galleons. So one of the theories is of I know his brother, a Catalan historian called Jordi Bilbeny, is behind a lot of this theories and has been very vilified here in Spain for coming up with mad Catalan nationalist theories. But we think he probably sailed from Pals in northern Catalonia, where a Catalan noble called Joan Colom was based. And obviously Columbus sailed back into Barcelona where he was met by Ferdinand and Isabel. So there's a lot of evidence that the Catalans and Aragonese had a lot to do with this. And also the theory goes that Jordi Bilbeny's theory is that his name was Joan Colom. People say, well, what was he called Christopher? Well, because the Pope at the time, the Borgia Pope at the time, was also a Catalan. The idea is that whoever set off on the expedition would take the Christian faith across the water like St. Christopher. So there's a lot of effort. I'm not certain whether the theory is true, but it's certainly a very tantalizing one.
Well, given the countries that Columbus explored, then it is obviously of some interest to our American cousins as to where Columbus actually came from. Now, you mentioned earlier the period of around the early 1700s. And how would you categorize the period from 1700 until the arrival of Franco? Was Catalonia left to run itself in that period?
No. I mean, it was a period of effective military occupation, which became more relaxed over time. In 1705, the War of the Spanish Succession began, or the beginning of the 1700s. I think 1702 actually. There were 2 pretenders when the King of Spain died. And one was Philippe of Anjou, and the other was Charles Habsburg of Vienna. And the Castilians wanted Philippe, and Louis XIV wanted Philippe. And the idea was to have to build a Hispano-French alliance that would dominate Europe. The Catalans plumped for Charles of Austria, and throughout the war received support from England and Holland, who definitely didn't want a Franco-Spanish alliance on their doorstep. And the war played out until 1712, when England were a bit sick of things. Unfortunately, Charles of Habsburg became king of the Austrian Empire. He was not expected. So the British and Dutch didn't want a strong Austro-Hungarian Empire either, and came out of the war. And England came out of the war in return for Gibraltar and Minorca. And so the reason for Britain's possession of Gibraltar to this day, which is still a point of argument, is it was given in return for pulling out of the War of the Spanish Succession. Catalonia and the Balearic Islands fought on bravely for another, in Catalonia's case, for another 2 years, in the Balearic Islands case for another 3 years. And in 1713, Barcelona came under siege. And this is when Barcelona probably had a population of about 30,000, 35,000. And there were 45,000 Franco-Spanish troops in Catalonia. And more than half of them laid siege to Barcelona. And Barcelona, with a force of about 5,000, an armed force of between 5 and 10,000, defended the city for 15 months. And Barcelona fell to the forces of the Duke of Berwick, interestingly. Damn English getting everywhere. On September the 11th, 1714. And the reason why Catalonia's National Day, and we come out in millions to demonstrate our independence, is September the 11th commemorates the loss of all our laws, charters, rights, language, etc. And after the fall of Barcelona, basically Barcelona came under military, Catalonia came under military occupation. The language was banned, the universities were closed down, all government officials were Castilians or Catalans who'd collaborated with the Castilians throughout the war. Soldiers were billeted in people's houses. Just imagine, people talk about the horrors of war today, but imagine coming under military occupation and having to live with your occupiers and pay for their food. This was a situation that there was a massive citadel built outside Barcelona. Now the park of the Ciutadella in Barcelona, which is a very beautiful park, housed a citadel of about 15,000 troops. Famously, the walls around the city that hemmed the city in, the soldiers on the walls had their guns pointing inwards rather than outwards to protect the city. Obviously, as the years passed, this relaxed. And towards the end of the 18th century, Catalonia began to recover economically. First with the export of fire water, a very, very strong brandy. So when Indians talk about fire water, aguardiente, this is Catalan produce. It was the Catalans that got all the Indians drunk in the cowboy films. You can blame us for that. And that began to boost the Catalan economy. And the Catalans, very, very canny Catalans, invested in their textile industry. And then by the start of the 19th century, there was a booming textile industry that, after the United States and Britain, was the biggest in the world, or in the Western world anyway.
I mean, I come from Lancashire. I come from Burnley, in actual fact, and that's certainly cotton area. So I know the technology that you're talking of. Right. Okay. So we've got up to the 1930s, and the situation is about to change, isn't it, when Franco comes to power?
Yeah. There's a bit more to fill in here, really.
Right. Okay. Absolutely.
People get really annoyed with me because most conventional Catalan historians say that Spain can only be considered a single country after 1714, basically, when Catalonia, the crown of Aragon, completely fell to the Castilian monarchy. I go even further out on a limb than most people, and I say that Spain, as a modern country, as we understand it, actually didn't start until 1873, during the First Republic, when effectively the tax differences. Up until that point, there were customs duties between the different the old kingdoms of Spain, and it was the first time there was a coin that had the Kingdom of Spain on it rather than Spain's. And I think this is an important point. And it is the first. There had been various constitutions from 1812 onwards, but it's the first vaguely modern constitution which begins to treat Spain as a modern nation. And if you think back to it, lots of nation states were created in the 1870s: Germany, Italy, Europe defined its borders. Britain and France had become nation states before that, but the Europe as we know it basically dates back to then. Following that, the Catalan industrialism, if you come to Barcelona, you'll see our beautiful Catalan modernist architecture. The end of the 19th century, Catalonia was really booming. And the reason, because of the textile industry, and the reason why we've got this fantastic architecture dating from the end of the 19th century is that because it was a rich, kick-ass place. And when you're rich, successful, then your politics kick off. And basically the Catalan independence drive dates back to that period. And Catalonia managed to have a kind of self-government in 1914 called the Mancomunitat, which is effectively the Catalan Commonwealth. And then the first people forget about Miguel Primo de Rivera, who in 1924 became the first Spanish dictator of the 20th century. He was ousted in 1931, and the Spanish Republic came in, which for most of its 6 years of existence was vaguely left-wing. You'll have might have heard of George Orwell's Homage to Catalonia.
Yes.
It was the great white hope of democracy and socialism in Europe at the time, as Hitler and Mussolini were on the rise. And when the Spanish Civil War was, in many respects, a practice run for the Second World War, because Franco, who started, people think Franco was the rightful governor of Spain. No, Franco launched a military coup against the legal Republican government, and quickly won in pretty much everywhere except, you guessed it, Catalonia, as usual. Where we've lots of other places. Madrid held out for a very long time as well. But Catalonia famously held out, and I really recommend people to read Orwell's fantastic Homage to Catalonia. It's on this that he bases. Orwell always said that he learned everything he knew here in Catalonia, and he bases Animal Farm and 1984 on stuff learned here. Anyway, Franco invited the Germans in to bomb the Basques, from where you get the famous Picasso's famous Guernica painting, and the Italians in to bomb the Catalans, because it's just across the water, convenient to bomb the hell out of us. And finally, the war was lost there was the famous Battle of the Ebro at the start of 1913, but the Spanish Civil War was lost on April the 1st, 1936, April Fool's Day, 1936, when Franco announced that there would be peace in our time. And the period of lots of Catalans went into exile, lots were put into prison, lots were executed by firing squad, and famously the Catalan president of the Generalitat, which is the Catalan government, legal president of the Catalan government, was caught in France by the Gestapo, handed over to the Francoist troops, and executed on the Mount of Montjuic here in Barcelona on October the 15th, 1936. Another very important date for us. And then we had to go through 36 years of Francoist repression. Franco died in 1975. And obviously, towards the end of the Francoist period, much like the occupation after 1714, the regimes relax. But just to give listeners an idea, in 1974, a Catalan revolutionary was executed by, the executions towards the end of the Franco regime were by garrote vil, which is I don't know if anybody knows. It's basically you put a turn screw on people's neck, and they're slowly suffocated to death, and their windpipe is crushed. This is in 1974, and the last executions of three Basque terrorists and two, I can't remember the name of the other revolutionary group, 5 or 6 revolutionaries actually happened just 6 weeks before Franco died in November 1975. So the regime was still very, very nasty right up until the end. In fact, in Argentina, a number of former Franco officials are still being processed for war crimes. There's a Spanish judge called Garzón who has taken it upon himself to pursue these people who are still alive. So in 1975, the regime was still pretty horrible. And I came here in 1988, and you could still smell fascism, I think. The ghost of Franco, only 2 weeks ago, it was the 40th anniversary of Franco's death. And yeah, there's still fascists out on the streets. It's a very different kind of fascism here, because it's a memory of Franco. It's a memory of traditional values and the good old days when we were all good old phalangists. And it's not like that in Britain. You know, Mosley, and I think, sadly, because I'm not slugging off Spain as a whole. I repeat, there's fantastic people here. It's a fantastic country in many respects, but to a large extent, it hasn't effectively broken with its fascist past in a way that Germany has, for example. The foundation Francisco Franco, until recently, was a charity, so it received public money. The Valle de los Caídos is the Valley of the Fallen. Franco has a massive mausoleum there, which is used by fascists to have their little get-togethers, and Franco is still seen by too many as a national hero. Where I'm not saying you should knock these things down, but these places should be used as places of shame, places to remember Spain's dark past, rather than places that aren't really commented on negatively enough, in my opinion.
Yes. I mean, most of Europe can look back on in history and have times that should be remembered and not forgotten, but certainly not misused in any way. I can agree with that.
Yeah, there's a question here from Skip. Wasn't Franco also involved in Austria about the same time? Not Austria. Franco desperately wanted an alliance with Hitler, and he sent. There was the Condor Legion and the División Azul that he sent to help the Nazis. And up until the end of the Second World War, up until 1945, then Phalangism, which is the Spanish version of fascism, was the official doctrine of the regime. After 1945 and the Allies beat Hitler and Mussolini, then fascism conveniently went on the back burner, and the official doctrine of the regime was national Catholicism, which, I mean, they just added the church into the mix. It was basically the same. And from then on, Franco had to modify a little bit, because he wanted to be part of the United Nations and wanted trade. In the 1940s and early 50s, basically Spain was completely isolated from the rest of the world. And as the end of the 1950s came in, then the swinging 60s came in, and Spain became modernized and started having connections with the rest of Europe. But the regime was still oppressive, really.
Until Franco's death.
Yes, and I would say afterwards.
So we've got we're in 1976, and we'll come up slowly to the present day. The growth, the regrowth of a call for independence from Catalonia. It took place in that period.
This is very recent, and again, I mean, I'll be clear about this. In my books, I make it clear I'm arguing the Catalan point of view.
Yes.
I suggest all listeners read round the subject. What you'll get from my point of view is there's a specific object here. I think the book is entertaining and a fun read. But I'm arguing in favor of the Catalans. In 1975, in what was known as the transition to democracy.
Yeah.
Now, Franco died, but his regime didn't die out. And as the transition to democracy took place, there was always the threat of a military coup, because the same people that had run the country under Franco were still effectively in power. Okay, the king made a good decision to back democracy. Everybody knew that Spain had to modernize, but it was touch and go. So the constitution in 1978 was a bit of a compromise. And it was particularly a compromise in the case of the Catalans, who wanted more freedoms then. But everybody was fair. The right in Spain have always hated red separatists. And what are the Catalans? They're both Reds and separatists, generally. So freedom for Catalonia wasn't the time to push for freedom. And it was an unwritten agreement that Catalonia would get more autonomy later on and would be treated as a separate nation. This didn't happen. People were relatively happy with democracy. In fact, there was an attempted coup in 1981 when Lieutenant Tejera of the Civil Guard and a group of civil guards stormed the Spanish Parliament, and the tanks rolled over Valencia on the 23rd of February 1981. So people were quite right to be worried about a coup, but democracy gradually came in and everything was fine. Then in the second half of the 90s, the Popular Party, the Partido Popular, who are now in government and are the direct heirs of Francoism. The party was founded by Manuel Fraga, an ex-Franco minister. He was on his way out by that point, but his successor was the Spanish president at the time, Jose Maria Aznar, who was a particularly nasty piece of work. And when the Partido Popular, this was the first time when I really became aware, living in Catalonia, of anti-Catalan propaganda, and tensions began increasing. And as the new millennium started, there were calls in Catalonia for more autonomy. And in 2003, the Catalan Parliament began drawing up a new statute of autonomy to replace the one that had come in 1979, and basically update it with new powers, greater autonomy. We weren't talking about independence then. We were talking about greater autonomy, a fairer finance system, control of our own judiciary, just being a little bit more like a federal state within Spain. In 2006, this was approved, voted in favor by the Catalan Parliament. Then it went to Spanish Congress, which is the main house in Spain, and Senate, and it was cut back a bit, but the new statute was approved by both houses of the Spanish Parliament. So this is complete democracy. Then it was passed by referendum in Catalonia. So you've gone through all the democratic processes. And once it became law, the Partido Popular, who are now not in government, took it to the Spanish Constitutional Court. And in 2010, after 4 years messing around and anti-Catalan campaigns, boycotts on Catalan goods, and general rubbish, the majority of the important articles were declared unconstitutional. And basically, that's when, I apologize to listeners now, but that's when the shit hit the fan in a big way. And that was the first time, up until that point, people like me had all been in favor of more autonomy. But that's when I suddenly thought, there's no chance in Spain. And that's when we had the first big pro-independence demonstration. but then it took another couple of years to organise, and really it's September the 11th, 2012. That was the one where we thought, wow, we can do this. 1.5 million people came out to the streets of Barcelona, and I remember that for me, that for many people, was when we were suddenly converted. We thought, yeah, if we can do this, we can run our own country. We're not mad terrorists or mad agitators. No, there's a strong groundswell of popular support. This is a grassroots movement that's wanted by millions of people. Catalonia has a population of 7.5 million, and there were 1.5 million out on the streets of Barcelona. It was incredible. And this has happened every September 11th for the last 4 years. So it's not going to go away, really.
And what's the situation currently?
Okay, currently we have on September the 27th, following the 2012 demonstration, the independence process kicked off, and the formerly right-wing, now centre-right Convergencia party, headed by Artur Mas, got behind it and decided to buy into the movement. And there were various lobbies for a referendum, which was refused and refused and refused. On November the 9th, 2014, we had the famous proxy referendum, in which 2.5 million participated in something that had been declared illegal, and 1.9 million people voted in favor of independence. But it was an unofficial referendum, so it couldn't be counted as official. On the 27th of September this year, we held what have been dubbed plebiscitary elections, and they were a de facto plebiscite. Basically, the pro-independence parties got together as a coalition called Junts pel Sí, which is Together for Yes, and promised that if the pro-independence parties won, they would begin the independence process. Unfortunately, as is the case with we crestfallen Catalans, there was another independence party called the CUP. The pro-independence parties actually won 72 seats out of 135 in the Catalan parliament, 68 being an absolute majority.
Yeah.
62 went to the Junts pel Sí coalition, 10 went to the far left CUP. And unfortunately, the far left CUP don't want to invest the leader of Junts pel Sí, Artur Mas, as president. So for over 2 months now, we're at loggerheads and can't begin a new government. So everything is raring to go. On the 9th of November this year, the Catalan Parliament made a declaration of the beginning of the independence process, but we've got no government to put this into practice, which is really, really annoying.
Right. Okay. We have a technical problem in that you've disappeared from our screens. I think I'm using some magic software, which I'm not. Could you just? I know I'm going to pause the recording. Okay. Simon.
Am I back?
You're
there?
back. There you are.
Well,
good.
I can't see myself though. But now it's come.
We can see you, which is the main thing.
I can now. I can see myself now.
Yeah, we've had lots.
It's very frustrating. I've been in and out, closing things. You know what happens when computers go wrong. Closing down browsers. I'm going on. I was on Firefox before. I'm on Chrome now.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, we've had in your absence, if you scan the column on the right hand side, we've had some fascinating comments. People have found our chat.
Okay, great. Yeah.
She's brilliant, and I was just saying that.
Hey, Hannah, nice to see you too.
Yeah, we've basically brought everything up to date, and as you say, it's a story that's not going to end, is it? Until when do you think?
Well, I mean, in fact, my next book, the book I'm working on now, is called. this will be my third book. My first book was Going Native in Catalonia, where I cover culture. It's a bit my integration. It's not a very serious book. It was me getting my feet wet. Yeah. The first decent book I've written was Catalonia Is Not Spain, and the next one is going to be, which is history, and the next one is going to be Catalonia, Democratic Disconnection from Spain, which basically covers the reasons for and the process behind what is happening now. And hopefully I'll be able to leave that. Ideally, I'm going to leave it at Christmas this year. And as I publish myself, the great thing about publishing yourself is, particularly if you're working if you're typesetting things at the same time as you're finishing off writing, which is a bit like a botch job really, but it means you can whack things out really quickly, the process isn't going to finish, even if now we don't manage to get a government. I think there's a solid 40-45% of people who are pro-independence here, and then we're not going to go away now, because once you've seen it sounds, I mean, this isn't. I mean, I'm English, or I was born in England. I feel very strongly emotionally attached to Catalonia, but this isn't some mad flag waving thing. No. I think it's a sensible political project. I also think at the end of the day, it will force Spain to have a good look at itself and modernize itself, because Spain also needs to come. It needs to have a proper democratic transition. I'm sure many listeners will disagree with me, but because most nation states only came together in the second half of the 19th century, I think the time of nation states as we understand them, being Brits, you'll almost certainly disagree with me, but this is what I've learned here. I think the time for nation states as we understand them, particularly in the European context, is past. Right. With greater European centralization, that's another issue, actually, whether that's a good idea or not. But I think there's freedom for regions to become regions. In actual fact, Barcelona is capital of a European mega region that goes down as far as Valencia and goes up to Lyon and Marseille, which is where economically, agriculturally, the region has much more in common with each other than Catalonia does with Andalusia or Galicia, for example. So I think we need to, without getting nasty or aggressive, we need to rethink our old concepts of national boundaries. And so the process definitely isn't going away. And I think it offers a lot of food for thought for international politics in general. I think we're in a process of change, and unfortunately what happens is when change happens, people put their hands up in the air and think, oh, what's going to happen? This is terrible. I'm not sure whether we have to see it like this. I think that I gave a speech in London a talk in London on Friday, and it was about independence and social change. And basically my argument, very unlike what we've been talking today, but it was the fantastic opportunity we have for us of creating a new modern country with everything we know. And hopefully getting systems right. Hopefully, there's a lot of touching wood and finger crossing to be done here. But I'm an eternal optimist and idealist. If you get involved in these things, you can't help but be, I think.
I see and feel your enthusiasm, and from the book, and I'm talking to you tonight. I'm in awe of the depth of your knowledge of Catalonia, and on behalf of everybody, I'd like to thank you for sharing that knowledge with us and bringing the book that you wrote to life. Because to hear you talk about it is it makes the experience 3D. I mean, you got the printed word, and the fact that you've been here tonight and talked about it has brought everything to life. Now, the next thing we can do, obviously, is you and I can arrange another chat. Because I think this went rather well, and then we can do that. But for the moment, if does anybody want to come in and ask a question of Simon live on air? all you need to do is press the call-in circle beneath our pictures, and you can ask Simon a question if you wish. If you want to ask a question in text, then you can put /Q question. Skip, Anna, you were brilliant tonight. Simon, it has been. I started my journey on Friday when I bought the book. I spent the weekend reading it, and you've brought everything to life, and I can now understand your stance on the topic, and I do sincerely thank you for sharing everything with us.
Well, it's been a massive pleasure, and really it's turned into a bit of a mission for me. I want to explain this to as many people as possible. So really thank you very much, Stephen, for giving me the opportunity to speak to your audience and the lovely people who are with you on Blab, and it's been great.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure, and as I say, we should get together again. And we're getting thanks from Anna and from Skip. I'm going to pause the recording now. So